Good morning. How are we doing this morning? Okay, let's get going here. Morning. 1 Thessalonians, we're going to pick up here. And remember, this first chapter, really, what we're doing is focused on showing how the gospel forms community, the new community, specifically these Christians in Thessalonica. We're going through a lot of resistance, even just with establishing themselves. And Paul says, listen, we have reason to celebrate, right? And he's pointing out these various things. But in this process, he's helping them to see how they need to see themselves, okay? He's exposing, as it were, their identity, their new identity, and how this works, this new value system, this new social group that they're a part of now. And he uses language to describe it as like official, like it's a real thing, like it's a legitimate thing. And all this would have been super important to these Christians in this culture. I think I might have spilled some water there. Picking up here, look at verse 1. He refers to them as the church. He uses language referring to God as Father. Paul even goes on using language to describe his relationship with them. It's all paternal family style language, which, what does that do? What does that do for us when we start thinking about mother and father and family and home? What does that do? What does that do for you?
For me, it brings back good memories.
Okay.
It talks about relationships, respect, honor, all these things that come along with family.
Yeah. Okay. Belonging? Is that what you said? Yeah. Okay. Remember, they got their identity from where? Family, right? Not like us, okay? They were born with it. They were given that identity, and everything was tied to it, okay? Everything was tied to it. Now, Paul uses this language to help re-socialize, as it were, their thinking and their understanding of what they're a part of, okay? And then Paul talks about God's action in their lives. So the first, and we went through a lot. I'm not going to review all of this, but the first part was there's reason to celebrate because you have a new identity, a new status is how we used it. Because it's not just identity is not just what I do or who I am in connecting with my family. It's your whole world, right? And it's connected to everything, resources, rights, privileges, everything, honor, okay, everything. And then he says you have reason to celebrate because of God's action in your lives, like what God is doing. There's evidence of all of this, right? And that's where we talked about last week. He uses in verse 4, picking up, he says, you're loved by God. He has chosen you, and that our gospel did not come to you merely in words, but in power in the Holy Spirit and with deep conviction. And we explored this idea that Paul uses throughout multiple letters. Election, what's another word that he uses? Chosen, what's another word? Predestination, okay? These are all terms that Paul used, and I hope you got this to understand that these were concepts that they carried with it certain how do you say this? A certain perspective, okay, a certain understanding, and it's not like what we think of when we say elected or predestined, all those things that we have kind of created to try to understand what Paul's talking about here, okay? Remember, Paul is reframing this idea, and those who were considered among the chosen, how were they viewed in Greco-Roman culture?
Very special.
Special. What are some other words? Blessed. What else?
You had special privileges.
Special privileges, right? Oh, you're so special, right? Must be nice. Remember that? Must be nice. It's the idea, they looked at, again, it's directly connected to identity and status. Remember, a couple of different examples, maybe one of the easiest ways to understand this is you had Roman citizens, right? But even among Roman citizens, you had a class, I use that term very loosely, but a class of Roman citizens that were considered chosen, as it were. Who were they? Those who were born as Roman citizens were considered among the chosen, the elite, the right, the privileged, the blessed, the, oh, must be nice. Does it mean that other Roman citizens or other people, other class, whatever, other people could not be considered a Roman citizen? No. But they weren't among the chosen, the blessed, the special, the, right? It's their lot in life. This is where they're at. Go ahead, John.
Similar to native-born Texans.
Whatever. I don't know. And I could say a lot right now, but I don't want to offend you, so let's move on. Okay.
What it means to be chosen?
So the Greco-Roman world, right, this chosen language signaled privilege, structured by patronage and hierarchy and your lot in life, if you will, okay? And so Paul retains the language, but he recasts it, okay? As, especially, man, when you look at all his letters, how does he recast this? As we're sharing in what? What are we a part of? Community, what does he specifically refer to it as? The family of God, right? And we are what? What's the word? Adopted. Remember adoption? Remember that? That's not like we look at it. Kids weren't adopted. It was grown adults. It was the game for the honorable, right? For the rich and famous, if you will. That's how we refer to it as. It was all about continuing on lineage, all about carrying on a name. It was all about prosperity. It's all about honor, right? And remember, adoption meant that you go from being a part of this family to being part of this family. You have a new identity, right? And you receive all rights, all privileges, like you were born there, like the chosen. Okay, does that make sense? That makes sense? And it's sometimes it can be hard because the words we use, our English language and what they mean and how we look at them, and trying to apply that to the concepts and especially Greco-Roman or other cultures. But it's not so much like, okay, I choose you and I don't choose you. It's, no, these were people who were born in, this is where they were. The God's blessed you, you know. It's like never mind, let's move on. Okay, so it's the idea is it's all about belonging, right? You're a part of this. You're among the chosen. And that brings what? What does that carry with it? Dignity. What else? Status. What else? Privilege. Rights. Without dominance or hierarchy. Okay? That was the Greco-Roman way. Okay? And Paul even talks about this when he talks about, remember how we came among you and how you received us like we were your little kids. And then we treated you like a mother treats their child, right? Like a father to the children, okay? So, and Paul's reframing, those among the chosen are not people who are signaled out, right, for what they bring, or for what they could give, but they're signaled out, even if you want to use that word. They're considered among the chosen because of what? Verse 3. Faith. They're considered among the chosen because of their faith. Okay. So the concept of chosen is not individual selection. It carries with it status, belonging, identity, association. It's an advantage, dignity, all those things, okay? But it's about being a part of the family of God, right? And I think this is what Paul is pointing out here in verses 3 through 5. And evidence of all this is something that he's pointing out, right? Like, look, it didn't come just with words, right? It came with what? God's action, God moving, right? There's things you can point to that say, yeah. Like, I want you thinking about it. If you go to the book of Hebrews and you talk about the Hall of Fame of people who represent faith, what was it about them? What did they do that made them special, if you will, as a reflection of what faith looks like? They acted it, right? And what caused them to act in faith? Belief, right? And what gave them belief? When Abraham and Sarah, that's the first couple he uses, Abraham and Sarah, given a promise. They considered the one who gave the promise as someone who was what? Trustworthy, right? Which meant that they had reasons. They had things they could point to say, yeah, okay, yeah, let's go. Let's do this. Even if there isn't clarity about how things are going to unfold necessarily, it's trust. And it's walking in trust. It's always the having something that you can point to say, okay, yes. Now, this is what Paul is doing. Think about it. They have enough going on inside, around them to disrupt, right, the church there. Would you agree? All the pressures, external pressures, which stir up internal pressures, right? And do we all not need to be reminded from time to time of specific things, maybe, that would help us in those moments? Yes. He's pointing to things that they can look at and say, yes. It's reminders, okay? And he's like, celebrate this. Why celebrate it? Why would Paul be celebrating this? Okay, to encourage them. What else? I mean, he's saying, look at God's grace here. What does that do for you? What does that do for us? Empowers, okay? When you look back on your own life and you see where you can point to things that say that was God. This is how he showed up. This is God's action in my life. What does that do for you? Gives you confidence, okay? What else? Puts things in perspective, okay? Yeah, say more about that. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Stops you in your tracks, right? Yeah.
I see it.
Yep.
Cannot believe it.
It's part of what Scott was talking about. Yeah. Okay. So let me just ask you a question here. Remember this. We celebrate what's important to us. We celebrate what we value. We celebrate, like, we don't have to be told. It's just a natural thing. Like, we celebrate what's important to us, right? And I believe that God's action in our lives is one of the most, if not the most important thing for humanity as a whole. So let me ask you this. Where do you see evidence of God's action in your life, in the life of the people around you, in God's community? Where do you see that? Think about that. Where do you see that? Where do you see God at work among us? Even in small ways.
I think loving and caring for one another.
Okay? Where do you see God's action? Okay.
Peace in trial or peace in difficulty.
Okay. Peace in trial and difficulty. Okay. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's important. I think it's important that we think about this and be able to articulate some very specific things, okay? Like, it's one thing to just acquiesce to the idea that you believe that God is at work in this world. That's easy answer. Yes. Because if not, what does that say about God? I mean, David, you know the Psalms of Lament where David's like, where are you? You never would get to the end of the psalm. You would never see him talk about the flip side of that, right? Because where's God? Well, he ain't here. He's off somewhere in the distance, right? It's easy for us to acquiesce to the idea that God is at work in this world. But I think it's super important for us to be aware of and be looking for those places and acknowledge those places where, no, we can point to things and say specifically, kind of like Chuck did, specifically, oh, that was God right there. I saw that. There's nothing else. It could be nothing else. Does that make sense? Paul?
Maybe kind of a silly little example, but when Kim and I were in Missouri, and I was working with prisons, there was a dinner we were going to go to that the church sponsored, but we weren't sure if we had enough to even
Mm-hmm.
get at that time. We thought, well, we're supposed to be there, but we're going to have to check with the budget to see if we've got the money. Went out to the mail that day, and there was a check from an unknown source in the exact amount that we give us.
Yeah.
Now, that happens to lots of people in lots of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But for those who are baptized believers in the resurrected Jesus, that has a little bit of pat on the back saying it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You get that.
Mm-hmm.
You get those things.
Yeah.
Too often, the world looks at everything and they say, well, I must be doing something good. God has blessed me. That doesn't really mean anything. Just because good things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that comes from God. He's the creator of all things. But that doesn't mean that I'm walking in his life.
Mm-hmm.
So we always have to go back full circle, like the Thessalonians. We're in Christ. Now we can know that there will be good things. And we'll stand finally when they come.
Okay. That's a good example. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. Yes. Yes. Which is one of the ways we celebrate it, right? Like that's one of the ways we celebrate that. Okay. I would suggest. I mean, listen. I think that God's action in this world and acknowledgement of that is really important. I think it's extremely important, if not among some of the most important things. Okay. Man, I could say a lot more about that, but how do we celebrate this? How do we celebrate this, right? So when you look in Scripture, historically speaking, how have people celebrated God's action, God's movement? Go back to the Old Testament. I don't care where you go. Historically speaking, how have we celebrated, human beings, how have we celebrated that reality?
We have gratefulness and joy and praise God.
Okay.
Never forget where the gifts come
Okay. What else? Okay. What else? Okay. What else?
It becomes a conduit of that blessing.
Okay. Prayer? Is that what somebody said? Yeah. Historically speaking, people of God have marked those actions, those movements, right, as reminders. Like they put things in place, right, to be reminded of the very things that we're talking about, right? So what are some of those? Feasts. Yeah, come on. Like real feasts, right? Not like, real feast. What else? Yeah, pillars, monuments, stones of remembrance, right? Just reminders, right? What else? Stories. You talk about the feasts and the festivals and all the things that go on, historically speaking, among Jewish communities, right? What do? They're reminders. They retell the story, right? A shared experience. You're a part of a community, but not just the present, but you're also connected to, it's the cloud of witnesses thing, right? Like so many. We're not in this alone, right? We're on this journey with lots and lots and lots of other people throughout time, right? Like, what is that? I mean, I don't know. I just feel like that's a special thing if you really think about it, right? Like, you are a part of the divine movement of God in reality, okay? And I think that's important. And so storytelling and testimonies, that's one of the ways we celebrate it, right? We talk about it. We share it, right? Why might we not do that? Not do that, yeah. They would always see it. Yeah. Okay. Why might we have difficulties in sharing and giving these testimonies, if you will? Yeah, think we're crazy. Yeah. Lack of commitment, okay. I think it's important. I hope you've gotten that. I think it's important that stories are powerful. We all live in a story in our own heads. But this is a story, okay? We see ourselves in a specific place. Stories are powerful. They're important. There's a reason why Jesus spoke in parables, stories. And just because you say the word story or narrative doesn't mean that it's fiction or nonfiction, does it? Story doesn't mean that it's fiction or nonfiction, one or the other. It can be both, right? Story. It's a narrative of what has unfolded, right? And I say that because I've had people complain about, well, you call it a story. Well, it's true. It's historical. Just because you call it a story doesn't mean it's not true, okay?
Jesus never started a parable with the citizens of Venus one day will declare war on Jupiter.
Right. Yeah.
Something real.
Yeah. So I think it's super important, okay, that we do share. And like I'm interested in other people's stories. I'm interested in where have you seen the Lord? And where have you seen God work in your life?
There was a fellow years ago who was working in the prisons, and he would hear all these wonderful stories about someone who'd been a drug addict, in prison, all these things, and then he finally came to the light that Christ would make a difference in his life. And the reality of the resurrection was not just a historical event, it became an event in their life.
Yeah.
And the guy was saying, wow, those are great stories, but I don't get them. And then as he went
Yeah, 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 yeah. You're exactly, yes. Which is why it's so important, I think, and valuable and powerful to hear people's stories. I have encountered that a lot in my life because my story, in comparison to a lot of goody two-shoes, is pretty extreme. And they think that, and I'll use that, I'm just joking, I use that loosely, but they think that, well, I don't have all of that. And, I've been surrounded by people, good mentors, who, they just always seem to make the right decisions. Of course, they have their own, but when they compare their story and their experience with someone like myself or others, it makes them feel like, well, I just, don't have that. That's not, it's like, yeah, no, you do. You just don't realize it, right? That's part of the trap of us comparing ourselves. When we compare, we always lose. Remember that. That being said, it's why it's so important to be hearing one another's stories, right? Because at some point, you begin to have your eyes open to the reality. You're going to see something that relates. Like, just because, your story isn't as extreme or seems as extreme as others, doesn't mean that God's not at work. Maybe it doesn't seem as extreme because, of the path that the Lord has had you on, okay? I think it's really important. So I would just challenge us, encourage the church as a whole to be thinking about ways we celebrate the story of God, okay? And we look historically speaking at how people of God have done this, okay? And I think we can learn a lot from that. All right? And especially in our day and age. Stories. Super important. Start there. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But I think, a lot of times, we, as adults, we're not in school. We're not having to turn anything in for homework or anything.
Yeah.
Sitting down and writing a short testimony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For each of us, and memorize it so we can share with others.
Right. Yeah.
Because on the one hand, I think the churches of Christ historically we've been a little bit careful. Testimony, and that's what these other groups do, is whatever. But at the end of the day, it's spending time looking for God's goodness and input on our lives.
Come on, man. Yeah. Like, tell me where it's bad. Like, tell me why that's not a good thing, man. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
That's Mark 5. The demoniac wanted to hang with Jesus because where else can I go? Jesus says, go back to the people and tell them what the way things are.
Yeah. What just came up to my mind was people who have backgrounds similar to mine learn from making mistakes more so than others. And when this one guy, he's deceased now, he was one of the two guys in my life who were just master craftsmen. Okay, we're talking to be able to, this is the kind of stuff you see in magazines, and to be there in the same room in their shop as their work, and they just really poured into me. I got tools from them and all kind of, it was great. The story that they had was, listen, I didn't go down that path, and let me tell you what I have experienced because I did not, right? It's the power of, listen, I didn't go down that path because I had a relationship with the Lord, right? And this is the direction that it took me. This is what I have experienced. And there's safety and security in that, and not having to experience these things over here. It's like, how has the Lord made your life better because you're following Him? It's not always just because He took me out of the pit of despair. It's because, hey, He kept me from it, right? And there's power in that, right? You have experience in that. So anyways, story, I think it's important. Okay? So moving on, Paul says, listen, so it's about, listen, your identity, there's reason to celebrate here. Look at what God has done. Look at God's action in your life. That's grace. God doing what you cannot do on your own. And then he says, as a result of this, Paul is celebrating what I call their tangible faith. Okay, tangible faith. And this is expressed in light of what he's going to say, in light of, remember, Timothy's report back to him. Because remember how all this went down? Like, Paul and they had to leave, right? And Paul was concerned. And this letter is Paul reconnecting with these Christians, okay? And he is ecstatic about what he's hearing, about what's going on here. And he's sharing that excitement, that celebration with them, okay? And so he talks about that tangible faith. Look at verse 3. Your work of faith, he says, work of faith, work produced by faith, if you will. Your work of faith and labor of love, labor motivated by love, if you will. And endurance of hope, right? That's endurance stemmed from what? Hope, okay? The Christian life. Like this, Paul said, this is how this works. This is how this works, okay? The Christian life begins in faith, right? Manifests in love and lives in hope. Do you guys familiar with Paul's writings? Is there anything in here that sounds similar to anything you've read from Paul before? Come on, man. Just about every one of his letters, he talks about what? Faith, hope, and love. Faith, hope, and love. These are values. I would say these are like values, okay, that the Apostle Paul continues to share with and helping people rethink about their life and identity and what they're a part of, to adopt these values, okay? And I would say, I use that term adopt loosely here because he's almost just saying, listen, recognize the fruit of these values. They're already there in you because you stepped in this with trust, right? And it has produced fruit, love, right? And you're living from this place of hope, okay? Especially in light of their situation. This is something that they have to be reminded of. There is a trust and expectation, right, of something to come. That was really, really important, okay? And the Apostle Paul is going to talk a lot about that in this letter, I think. So these are common in Paul's writings, right? Now remember this, groups thrive when things like this, and I call them values for our modern day language here, they thrive when these types of things are pointed out, when they're emphasized. Would you agree? People like naming and articulating things like this, things that are of importance or value, right? And that happens here in our day and age, and it was also true for groups within the Greco-Roman culture, okay? And so Paul saying this, he's tapping into something that they would have understood as important, okay? Naming them not only demonstrates the fact that they're important, but it also does what? Reinforces them. Because notice, he's not saying, hey, if you keep doing this, then these are the 3 things that are going to happen, does he? No. He's pointing out to them what he already sees. And he wants them to see it as well. You guys see that? Okay? So naming them reinforces them. Faith, hope, and love, right? They're like core virtues that will sustain them through all these external pressures and maybe even the internal cracks that might happen as a result of the pressures, okay? But notice, it's like their faith is visible. How do we know their faith was visible? Not abstract. Others saw it, man. Others saw it. Even if you keep going on, Paul's eventually going to say, yeah, and we don't even have to share. People know about it. It's been cast far and wide, right? People know about it. Right? It's demonstration. It's not just mental assent to some concepts here. This is being like walked out, okay? Being lived out, and people are able to see it, okay? So this faith here, it's visible. It's not abstract, and I think that's important for us, okay? Because here's the thing. Let's kind of step back into Greco-Roman culture, and this is just social science, period, okay? identity, especially group identity, all right, in collectivistic cultures, collective identity is maintained through visible practices, acts, things that reflect and demonstrate the value that the person has on the group and how he's putting the group as the utmost importance, okay? How he has prioritized the identity of himself among the group. Does that make sense? Okay? Like they would be looking for something in your life. They would expect it and also be looking for something in your life that demonstrated your loyalty to this. Now, think about that. They're coming out of a Greco-Roman, culture. They're still in that culture, but they're coming out of certain associations and identities that are connected to other gods, patrons, worship of politicians, right? Anything that came along with the patron system, right? What would that mean for them? What would this, when Paul's talking about this, in light of that, what does that mean? How would that impact that? How would it affect it?
Sometimes they have to go counterculture and
Listen, come on. Yes, think about it. Okay, if proof of your loyalty is demonstrated, which it always is, right? By actions, by what you do. What happens if you don't go burn incense to so-and-so? Or offer the incense before you enter into the building where, your local, group is meeting? Come on, man. Hold on, wait a minute. What's going on here? People begin to question. Do you see how that might cause some problems? Okay? So that's the reality for them, not just in their culture with these other pagan, I use that word loosely, not really pagan, but other Greco-Roman gods in the system, okay? But it still would, Paul is helping them, it still would apply within this structure. Does that make sense? And he's showing them that. Like, listen, you're demonstrating this loyalty here, right, to one another, okay? So this is what Paul is seeing in them, right? So, question. When we see people around us actually trusting in the Lord, what does that do to you? When you see people around you actually trusting in the Lord, beyond just word. And I think that's important because the Apostle Paul says, listen, the word this didn't happen just in word, right? But there is power, there's fruit, there's demonstration of this. What does it do to you when you see somebody else around you? Come on, right? It's like, wow. People who just seem to trust on a different level. What does it do to you? Yeah, just, right? Come on, man. It's like, wow. Sometimes it does make you look at yourself, like, whew, right? I suggest the first thing it should be would be like, wow, what is the Lord doing in their life? I think the first response should be positive. And then there's also reflection like, what does that say about me, right? That's healthy, that's okay, that's good, right? But at the end of the day, when you see people actually trusting in the Lord, is that not reason to celebrate? I mean, come on, right? Like, and I get it, like, it's so, we could take it for granted, man. Like, you're living this life and doing, like, hold on, let me think. I lost it, I'm sorry. Familiarity breeds contempt. Become just so familiar with something sometimes, and we'll lose sight of that reality, right? Right. Come on. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
in this room years ago that I saw this faith. They were busy. I asked them to come to the side room here, and I said, we need you.
Hmm. Just,
Because of the way they live.
hmm.
You can see it.
Yeah. 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 Should give us reason to celebrate, right? And then how do we celebrate that?
I agree. Totally celebratory. That little twinge that you mentioned earlier. I think that's what the spur one another on to good works.
Mm.
Works might be a little painful, but they get you to a good spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I don't want to forget about it.
Mm.
Those goals.
Mm.
Trying to go, it's
Yeah. 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 So how do we celebrate it? When you see someone actually trusting in the Lord, like putting their trust in the Lord in a way that it's like, man, how do we celebrate that? Say something, right? Anybody else?
emulate that behavior and try to be that way yourself.
Okay. Hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to say some things. This is what I like to watch American Idol. And last year, Jelly Roll was on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at him
Mm.
and you make a decision, it's not going to be a very good decision. And you've got to really, really struggle to bypass his look.
Mm.
You know, he's got the prison tag.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about being in prison.
Mhm.
He talks about God now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's huge. And I have finally put the look behind me.
Yeah.
And I pray for this guy.
Yeah.
And you're doing wrong.
He's a jelly roll man. Come on now. That's good. That's so good. That's so good.
Did you hear what he said at the Grammys?
That's so good. Huh?
And the guy is in public.
Yeah.
He's not ashamed.
Yeah.
Now, for
Yeah.
those guys that take that shame, now this is what I was thinking about earlier. Never say anything back. But I don't want to downgrade being raised in the church, because I think
Right.
that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
But when somebody comes along that didn't have that privilege,
Mm-hmm.
but found God,
Mm-hmm.
they generally have a pretty interesting
Come on.
story.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get curious, right? That's what I do. I get curious. Like, I want to know your story. Like, what's happened in your life? Where do you see God? What's going on here? Help me, right? Like, yeah, just get curious. Just get curious, right? And there's something in that for us, I think, right? Because I do want to celebrate. I want to share in that with them. Like, man, because, yeah. Well, we could say a lot more. But next week, we're going to continue on here, and we're going to show verses 6 through 8 how they were a model for transformation. Remember, this is all in the guise of how the gospel establishes community, okay? Like, it was God's action. Paul starts with God's action, right? This is a movement of God, okay? But you, as a result of that, are a part of this family, new identity, right? And God has moved among you and has created this tangible faith. And when he summarizes it all up, it's the process of transformation. It creates community because it transforms people, right? And they all have these shared experiences. Great thing. Okay.